Petruccioli today, for this is the third lecture organized by FAA on completion of 50 years of School of Architecture. The sole intention of the series is to start generating activities for the next year when they complete 50 years, and that students at large feed from these lectures. Professor Petruccioli, way back in 1983, seminar we attended together at Heidelberg. And since then, of his extensive work in architecture, in particular Mughal period, and more specific, Fatehpur Sikri, one of the things that he's going to talk about. Today in the morning, studio in Attillio together, Doshi Attillio activities. He is at the moment at Bari. He researches on Islamic architecture here in Africa, organizes several seminars, and has authored and edited something like 25 books, 100 and odd articles, and same number of seminar papers. He has taught in past at Rome in the Faculty of Architecture, at Algiers, and in Mozambique, and for 5 years was the Aga Khan professor at MIT in US, and also taught at University of Maryland. His recent achievement or attachment at Bari, where he is the Dean and Professor Emeritus, and is one of the most prominent schools in Europe. Recently I had a privilege to visit the school, and I saw most wonderful major drawings of Indian cities. Of course, there were several Islamic ones of Africa were also measured there too. And truly they were most informative, precisely drawn, and perhaps the best document we shall ever have for years. As this task of measuring has taken around 10 years of regular systematic visits from students and faculty every month for a regular visit, this European approach in seeing and documenting these great monuments of our civilization will be one of the most important contribution his Polytechnic at Bari would be made. Of course, behind all this work, we know it is Professor Petruccioli's passion and zeal that has produced these drawings. Recently there were talks with the Italian embassy to trying to collaborate and exhibit some of his work in this country too. He has received several prestigious awards in Europe, Japan, and US. These are very rare moments in the school that we have such august crowd, and some of our professors, Professor Doshi, Professor Minaben, and Professor K.B. Jain, Amita wants to come, and Professor Raje, Miki Desai, and others have attending this lecture. The reason is most apparent that in past he has shared his work with all of them, and they all are interested in his research and his passion for Mughal architecture of our country. And as I mentioned Fatehpur Sikri in detail, the involvement of Professor Petruccioli became so intense in working in Fatehpur Sikri that he named his son Akbar. And today he signs his name as 40-year-old son of his as Guido Akbar Petruccioli. We all are eagerly looking forward to your presentation, types and structures, notes on Indo-Islamic architecture. Dear friends, colleagues and students, Professor Attilio Petruccioli.
After such wonderful presentation, whatever I will say will sound very poor to you. I'm sorry. Thank you, Snail, and many thanks to the faculty and the alumni that made this event possible and this visit to India. I belong to the so-called Italian School of Typological Studies that goes back to Professor Muratori in the 50s, and that was transmitted from master to pupils of the pupils, and now it is still flourishing in the School of Architecture of the Polytechnic of Bari, where I have transmitted what I knew and what I have learned from my masters, and a few things that I have added on my own. I will convey tonight 3 ideas out of this thinking, and the rest, if you want, you can read in my book that is called After Amnesia, that is in your library. I also called it After Insomnia, because if you read it after dinner, you will fall asleep. Okay. The first idea is the problem of history. I blame the modern movement because at a certain point they got rid of history. They said, look, what is old, we put it into the fridge in the museum, but what is the present, it's up to us. And we are going to invent the present. We don't need the history for it. So they started to relate on principles and rules that were essentially self-referential. And the crisis, what I see in the last 50, 60 years, is a continuous crisis that was generated, in my opinion, from that separation between architecture and history. I think, on the contrary, that we should re-establish the continuity, and this is the magic word that I propose tonight, continuity with the history. History not intended as a sort of a cabinet where we can have forms that we can take at our will and we can reuse and so on, as in the postmodern architecture, not at all, but history intended to be as a process. A continuous process of transformation of the structures and the cities where we live, and in that transformation, in my opinion, are buried the principles and the rules of the architecture that we have to understand and we can take for our architecture. The second idea is more general about the architecture. I think that as at the real essence of the architecture, we can reduce the problem to two ways of approaching and putting together a building. One belongs to the peasant, the guy that is familiar with the earth, and he is manipulating the earth plastic. And all the architecture that are related to that, from the earth architecture, from bricks and even stone, they are characterized essentially by the fact that raising the walls and closing the building, you do in one movement. As you can see, for instance, in this beautiful royal vault of the Sassanid Palace in Iraq. I forgot the name of the capital. And the other one is the people of the forest. And they use the material they have. And essentially, at the end, what characterizes this way of closing and of making and closing the building is the fact that it is made in two different actions. Because first you have to make the structure, and secondly you close it with a different material. I mean, always timber, but different size and form. And this, let's say, line of or this type of architecture that we call elastic, opposite to plastic, elastic, and also timber architecture, essentially. Of course, this is so schematically, that you don't have anymore one civilization that is totally masonry or one that is totally timber, but always you have interconnections, mediations, encounters between the cultures. Or, for instance, you see this beautiful mosque in Khiva in Uzbekistan, where this forest has been transformed into a structure, essentially posts and beams, and very, very, very simple. But it could also happen that you get out of that material, because you destroy all your forests, and you change your economy, you change your appreciation on the landscape, but what you have in your mind, in your tradition of building, that is part of your genetics now, will remain. And it could happen, for instance, that your architecture, that is an architecture of timber, becomes an architecture that we say liticized, that means transformed into stone. But it's a stone keeps the way and the thinking and the attitude of the carpenter, and it is assembled following the same logic. That is not the logic of the mason, it is the logic of the carpenter. As for instance, a famous example is the prayer hall in Fatehpur Sikri. Of course, these two attitudes are mixed, and at a certain point in the history of architecture, it's even difficult to understand when it happened, how it happened, what are the proportion of one attitude and the other one. I think that the area where I'm more familiar, that is Northwest India, it's very much characterized by this almost indifferent attitude of mixing, the heavy masonry, very heavy masonry, and light timber structure transformed into stone. This nice little octagonal pavilion that you find outside the Ajmeri gate in Fatehpur Sikri is, I think, emblematic of this double attitude. So the box, the structure is essentially made of very heavy, also rough rubble stone masonry, and the nodal points, that you see a detail on the right, that means the loggias and the solution of the corner, they are made out of this cut stone. But sometimes the thing is not so readable, and it's very tricky and also ambiguous. And this, I think, is one of the fascinations of the so-called Indo-Muslim architecture of Northwest India. Probably you are familiar with the riwak of the mosque in Fatehpur Sikri, and you have all over around the courtyard the arches, but if you look carefully, they are not arches. There are two brackets, that give you the sense and the form of the arch, but that are not arches at all. They give you the sense that they belong to the ward of the masonry, but actually they belong to the ward of the timber in stone. Or even more ambiguous, look at this structure that is in Fatehpur Sikri. It's called Ladao. It's a vault. I mean, it conveys a message that it is a vault, but actually it's not. It's not at all, because if you are able to dismantle that, you will realize that it is made out of two structures. One is the box, the vertical structure, the walls that are very, very thick and made out of masonry, and then a complicated structure made out of small pieces of stone that have the form of the wall with the curves and everything, and they are they are tied together, but they are kept together, by the resistance, only by the resistance of the wall. So they convey the idea of being a vault. It's not a vault at all, logically. And looking at this image, I have always the temptation of squeezing the walls to make the structure jump, all the little pieces like that, because it's an hyperstatic structure. Very interesting, very thing. Well, the third idea that I want to convey is the idea of type. I strongly believe that if you want to study the processes of history, you cannot study every building in a place, otherwise you will never finish, So you have an interesting intellectual tool that is called type. It's a shortcut, let's say, in a way, because it allows you to find intellectual categories that will put together infinitive elements that have something in common. So I propose you this definition. Type is the organic ensemble of the common characters of buildings in a given area and over a defined period of time. Everybody agrees on the fact that it is an ensemble of characters. But I think it's more important to underline the other thing: given area and defined period of time. Given area means that in a certain area, Ahmedabad, you have a type of house, and that's part of the genetic and the culture of the local society. But if you go 100 kilometers away, you have another type. Okay, for sure. So type is, particularly the type what we call basic type, that means the dwellings, the houses, they are deeply rooted into the local culture. They don't travel. The other issue is that in a certain period, the people have in mind a certain type. But after a certain amount of time, that type will change. People change, needs change, ideas change about the architecture, so the type also will change. So what I am proposing to you is not the idea of type as a fixed image of the history that you can take and play with it, but it's a process. So in that sense, what is interesting is that the type is a process that starts from a beginning, maybe 800 years ago, 1,000, depends on the local situation, and goes on, in continuity in time. Very short diagram. Forgive me, I'm a bit boring, but this idea of type is a general idea that is in the mind of everybody in a certain area. When they have to build their house, for instance, everybody has a clear idea how the house should be. Okay? If we are in Ahmedabad in the 19th century, you knew that the house had certain requirements and everybody wanted that house, which is basically as a diagram, which is, for instance, at the beginning, something like this. It's just a diagram of a courtyard house. It's not important. But in the reality, when you build your real house, you have to face the reality, and therefore you have to face, for instance, the fact that the plot is irregular. You have to face the fact that the plot is not flat. You have to face the fact that maybe you don't have much money, and therefore you will build something that is different, slightly different from the ideal type. So where is the okay? So you will build what are variations. Within certain time, in the second phase, the ideal type will be something different, and all those variations have contributed to the creation of this new ideal type. So the thing goes on and on, until not necessarily should be a continuous process, because you have problems, you have calamity, you have phenomena that will stop the continuity of this evolution of the type. This is the case, for instance, in many Asiatic countries or African countries, the presence of the colonialism. Or in Italy, it was the Black Plague that happened in 1334, and that stopped the economy of the Italian cities, and they never recovered until the 19th century. Can you imagine? So in this long gap, okay, what happens is that the type, the ideal type, doesn't evolve. People lose the memory of what an ideal type should be. They only continue to transform the city that exists. There's no extension of the new city. They transform the city that exists, and so you have variations, of course, that go on. When the people recover the economy and the city tend to grow again, and so there is a tendency now to recreate this idea of the new type, but they have lost the memory. So what happens in this case is that people refer to another area that is called, I called leading cultural area, that is militarily, economically, and culturally more important. Let's say the capital of the Mughal Empire compared to a provincial city or things like that. Well, in that case, the idea of the court type or the capital type and so on, it is imported. Okay? Well, what has happened here? Okay. It is imported and mixed with the typological variations that went on, and the new leading type is created at this point, and then the process goes on and on. Now, one more thing, if I can. Okay, the other issue is the problem of the mosques and special buildings, a mosque, a big palace, and so on. In the case of the mosque and big palace and all those buildings, you know, they travel more as a type because there is a lot of intentionality in it. It's not so spontaneous like the house. So there is a lot of more transformation and traveling in those. But all of them, by rule, by definition, I'm convinced of what I'm saying, they come from the house. They are always a sort of specialization, what we call specialization, of the basic type, which is the house. So this is the case, for instance, that even in the mosque, you know, the early mosque was a specialization of an house, a courtyard house. And then you can trace other processes from the basic process of the house. You can take other processes of the special types, like, let's say, the mosque. But again, you know, those processes, they can again branch into further specialization. Take the case, for instance, of the Ottoman mosque, that at a certain point branches from the hypostyle type of the mosque through an elaboration of what is the main dome in front of the mihrab, and becomes bigger and bigger and bigger until with the Zenana architecture that is the only real space that is interesting for him. And so the mosque that was an hypostyle structure becomes just a central space. Okay, end of the boring thing. Let's go into now with those little notes. Let's go now into the story of the Indo-Muslim architecture, into a sort of work in progress, you know, that I'm thinking in this period. So it will be full of jumps and also mistakes maybe. So I would be delighted to be corrected. Working on Amber, we discovered an interesting building that is called Narsingji Haveli or so, and that is extremely old. Following, I mean, the sources seems that it is a 12th century building. So basically, what the dynasty of Amber did, basically, is a sort of sloping down from the top where they were settled at the beginning, and where they later on built the huge fortress that is dominating all the area of Amber. And sloping down along this minor ridge, you know, reaching this promontory, they settled, you know, their residence. That was their city residence. Now, what is interesting is that if you look at the building that still exists, it is abandoned now, but still existing. It is now made out of two big courtyards, very much encroached. But we surveyed and we were able to understand the process of evolution. It was clear that the origin of the structure was a big courtyard, the red one that you see to the right, and a very important Vishnu temple that is to the left, where there is a famous Toranam, beautiful piece. It's very famous, by the way. But people go to see the temple. They don't look at the Haveli that actually is abandoned and it's also dirty. So, but if you look at this structure, in spite of the encroachments that you see, this is basically a very simple serial structure, you know, with spaces that are similar and rather repetitive, and with only one element of we say a nodal element, that is on top the residence of the, let's say, Maharaja or the leader in general, which is this. Otherwise, it's a very simple structure. So we can say that the beginning is very simple. It's a courtyard, you know, very closed and very simple, and not very differentiated in the different functions. We see some section that will show you, if you see the structure below, you would see this courtyard with later additions, you know, because later on it was transformed into the Zenana as usually, but with the elements that are added, with the residence of the Maharaja here, but essentially then you have simple rooms organized around it. And other section, this is again our courtyard with additions, later addition, and so on. But basically, it is there. What is happening? It's very hectic, this. Okay. Now, let's move to another case, which is the case of Bundi. Bundi is an interesting structure, no? As you can see, in a way similar to Amer. You have the bottom of the valley where you have the settlement, but also the artificial lake, as in Amer. You have the hill, and at the edge of the hill you have the palace, which is huge structure. You know, let's see if I can do without creating problems. If I show you, okay, huge structure, like the Vatican in Rome, you know, enormous. And so we surveyed. I mean, we surveyed because we were interested, but we didn't have any pre-concept about it, preconceived idea. But then we discovered that on the top of the structure, exactly here, there was what we consider for sure the original nucleus, the starting point of this complicated structure that grows and grows in time so much, which is actually this courtyard that you see top to the left. That is again, you know, a very simple structure, rooms all the same, and small apartments arranged around this courtyard. So basically a quadrangular courtyard. Which is this? Probably you have seen the palace, and okay, thank you. You have seen the palace, so you are familiar with it. Of course, this image is recent, and it means that the structure grew on itself. You have also 19th century minor additions, of course, and so on and so forth. But the basic idea is there, okay? Like as well, you know, a courtyard, and very serial. This is it. It's the famous courtyard with the famous swing for the ladies. Because again, later on, it was transformed. It became this nucleus, that is the original one, became the Zenana of the palace. Okay. In 1556, Akbar visited the Amer. He made an alliance, an agreement with the local dynasty, Kechawa, and married a lady, a princess of that dynasty. He was, in my opinion, extremely influenced by the general layout of the city, the technique of using and distributing the waters, the use of the artificial lakes, the use of the landscape that clearly he got from the Rajputs. And when he went to Fatehpur Sikri, he created an artificial lake. He organized his palace on the top of a ridge, very low, but it's a ridge, and so on and so forth. But in relation with the palace, it did something different. So it didn't follow what was the suggestion of the Rajput that were allied with him. You have here, this is a model that I made many years ago of Fatehpur Sikri, 1 to 500 scale. It was very detailed, very beloved. It went destroyed. You know, it happens in the life. But I have few images, and this image is taken on the axis of the access to the palace from the aggregate, and you see the layout of the palace that is very hectic. You know, it's not. It doesn't look very ordered. Nevertheless, it is a big statement of architecture. And there, let's see the story. What is behind? In the patrimony of the Mughals, there was clearly the Mughal camp, the military camp, the encampment. They used to move a lot, as you know, so I'm repeating things that everybody knows. And there was this technique of making the encampment that was a real exercise of planning, you know. And the way the various spaces of the encampment were organized, it was very well fixed and decided. And it is also described very clearly in the Ain written by Abu Fazl. Nobody reads the Ain, I don't know why. And even the translator of the Ain, a certain Blockman, he made a drawing of this encampment that is something similar to this drawing. Actually, this drawing I have redrawn from a cloth that is preserved in the Tropical Museum of Amsterdam, and shows that the various spaces, are organized along an axis. You have from bottom to top. You have the main entrance, the main access with the akashdiya, the light that was all the time enlightened in the camp. Then you follow with the Diwani COS, and the Zenana, and around you have a sort of bazaar. It's a beautiful cloth, actually, but that shows not the royal encampment. That shows a Mughal encampment, which is slightly different. In reality, if you read carefully the Ain, you will see that the organization of the various spaces of the encampment are very active. They are not organized along an axis, because it clearly says this is to the right of that, this is to the top, this is to the left. So if you try to redraw it, you will realize that it is something that goes not with a regular layout, but that looks almost casual. I don't want to lead you into the usual play to decide what are the functions of the various spaces of Fatehpur Sikri. Some of them are very clear, but many of them are not, because they are flexible spaces, because they are difficult to interpret, because it's difficult to relate sometimes the Ain with the reality of Fatehpur Sikri. But some things are sure. The first the oldest building, is the core of the Zenana, okay, which is this palace, that you see here. That is a courtyard, very secluded, closed by a wall, very similar to the let's say original palaces of the Rajput of the time, but with already certain elements that make the difference. You have a system that is organized along two axes. The axes are not equal, because this is as a higher weight, because you have a chapel here and the monumental entrance there. But besides this, essentially, the structure is the same, But the rest is is different. The Diwani is the second structure that was built, and that has a clear function and so on. But then when you enter into the core of the palace, then you have some problems into deciding the sequence and so on. I have been convinced that something very interesting happened. In few words, the encampment definitely belonged to the genetic of the Mughals, but there were important transformations in that time. And Fatehpur Sikri is very interesting because it is the laboratory of the research and the transformation. It goes around the story of the ladies. Mughal ladies at the beginning were rather free. Gul Badam Begum was a very proud character, and she was very strong. And even the mother of Akbar, Miriam Makani, she was a governor of Delhi for 2 years. We cannot imagine those ladies in Parda completely secluded, And in fact, in the time of Babur and Humayun, ladies used to go around. They were rather free, let's say. Rather, I said. Huh? Okay? Rather. But what happens with the construction of Fatehpur Sikri? What happens is the theory and the idea of the perfect man that is for Akbar, of course. And this idea of the perfect man goes with the idea of the perfect woman, that is the wife. So in a certain way, this ideological construction of the perfect man created a lot of problems to the ladies. And so slowly they lost liberty. And so the creation of the Zenana was a continuous negotiation between the ladies and Akbar and the court. And this explains, in my opinion, this difficulty of interpreting the space of the Zenana, Fatehpur Sikri. That is more or less what you see there, with the Miriam Makani pavilion and the so-called Raja Birbal pavilion. That is not Raja Birbal, but was probably Gulbadan pavilion. This difficulty of interpreting and changes that you see there, in my opinion, are the testimony of this fight, or let's say better, negotiation that went on in Fatehpur Sikri at that time. The ladies lost the battle, definitely. Well, I'll show you this. It's, together with the negotiation, let's say, there was also research, an architectural research of new types and pavilions that could reply to these necessities. And you have the various pavilions different, because everything is experimental there, so it's difficult to find references to something that happened before. You have another interesting building that is down below there, that is called the so-called Diwani COS. I never believed it is a Diwani COS. And I think that is a peculiar structure that existed before in every Mughal camp. It's a sort of meditation space. It was intended for that. It was a platform, and it was covered with a canopy. And this space, the so-called Diwani COS, it's a very highly symbolic structure, with 4 corners that are underlined by the 4 chatris, and with this strange platform everybody tried to give an explanation to that, but the most logic actually is that only one person can stay there in the dark and probably meditate. So I'm quite sure that this invention, typological invention made in Fatehpur Sikri replies to this requirement and functional. Daftar Khana is again, that is a structure that replies to the problem of the functionality. Daftar means record office. It was the ministries and all that stuff were connected there. But it's interesting because here you have again this integration that it's astonishing for me between the maximum of the masonry and the maximum of the carpentry. You have the room, the main room, that is, closed by those super thick walls, covered with a ladau, and then surrounded by a porch that is made out of sticks, that are interconnected and put together with the carpentry structure. At the end, you have the other structure and the so-called Anup Talau, together with the bedroom and so on. Nobody knows if the bedroom is there, is a real bedroom or not. It's not important. What is interesting is that at the end appear, let me see if I have another, at the end what appear are bridges, And then you say, why bridges? What is the sense of that? Again, that is part of that reinterpretation of the role of the Zenana. So the original Zenana is a very secluded, building, very closed. And then it goes around in pavilions. But then those ladies should have the possibility, in order to give to them the possibility to be interconnected with the Mardana, the space of the man, at least from the top, to participate into the life. Then they have added those bridges. So it's a very articulated, complicated structure. But that's also the fascination of Fatehpur Sikri. What makes a beautiful space is that enormous complication. Although sometimes it is difficult to understand it. Well, let's go back now to our original building. So, Mughal, Akbar they took power everywhere, and they became what we can say, the Fatehpur Sikri became what we call the leading area type, in a way. So it was basically the model of became the model of reference for all the provincial capitals, either belonging to the empire or belonging to the Rajputs. So Rajputs slowly enter into this logic, and they try to accommodate and change their palaces according to the leading type from Fatehpur Sikri. And we see that our building added one more courtyard. It added, let's see, a Diwani, small, but it's there. It added a Diwani COS that is on top of this building. Let's see, here. Okay, so all the paraphernalia, all the main structures that now are the model. You cannot have a royal palace or so-called royal palace if you don't copy from there. Therefore, all the structures are transformed. The old courtyard that you see to the right, it is transformed in such a way that they put a long, elongated, tall building in the middle that becomes a sort of bayonet, dog leg entrance that is protecting in a special way this space that is going to be the Zenana, becoming the Zenana. And the Mardana, the space of the man, becomes the new area where you have the Diwani, Diwani COS, and other similar functions. What happened to our spaces? Well, the same in a certain way happened in Bundi. No, you have to your left this area. This first space that became the Zenana, and the space grew in time. An important Diwani, very monumental, with a monumental entrance was added. The Diwani COS was added. Another structure later on was added to the Diwani COS. The Diwani was working on both ways in the courtyard, but also here. Sorry. But also here, facing the huge Maidan inside of the palace again, where the Jaroga Darshan was performed. So even the rites were copied. The rites and the architecture, were imported from the royal Mughal court. And then later on another raised platform, natural platform, a beautiful charbagh was built in the 18th century. Other structure, around the charbagh for the court. And finally, this is not a drawing of mine, a survey of mine. In the royal family moved in the second part of the 16th century, moved into the new palace. The new palace was built in Amber. We are in Amber, sorry. The new palace was built along a ridge, a promontory, following the same logic, but it was built anew. So they start building what? The Zenana, of course. That means they started from the back. Okay? And then slowly they grew into the sort of Diwani COS, and then the Diwani and then the big courtyard that works as a vestibule where you arrive with the elephant. I don't know if you went there. Okay, I can use. There?
Yes.
Okay. That's better. Okay, and strange enough, this layout replicates the Blockman interpretation of the Mughal camp, that is organized along the axis. I could stop here my lecture, but and of course nobody would complain. You know, it's okay. It's an interpretation, fine. But you know why I'm studying all this history of Indian architecture, not only Indian architecture? Because I'm an architect, and because I believe that in history I can retrieve the principle of the design. I don't have to invent those; they exist. The problem is to find them critically. So we also design. So I asked my students to make projects wherever we go and we survey, trying to catch, you know, the principles and the ideas from the context. Try to be modestly part of that context as much as they can. I mean, what I'm going to show you is 2-3 projects made by students, so with all the effects of the students. But to show you a direction, to show you a philosophy, to show you an attitude, let's say. Okay, I'll show you. This is a very beautiful map. It's an old one. It is preserved in the Maharaja Museum of Jaipur. And it shows the part of the palace, the vestibule of the palace, the most recent part, where the elephants arrive, and all the area in front of it. All this area, if you can see, is crowded with havelis, and different size, but basically they refer to 1 or 2 main types. And so looking at this map that we had to retrace and so on, it's a very difficult story. There is a short chowkidar of the Maharaja that checks that you don't make pictures. Of course I made a picture at the end. Anyway, of this fabric, that isn't gone now, but out of that fabric it was possible to reconstruct a possible typological process of those, of the Haveli of Amer. And some of them are real types, very abstract. Some of them can be reconstructed from the various typological variations. But anyway, if you see schema ricostruttivo del tipo in the center, it is possible from the most simple structure into the most complex, you know, here, reconstruct the evolution of the type. To the left you have the various typological variations of the same leading type and the variations, you know. So this thing is a basic instrument that allows to start when you want to design something. You see here some of the examples with the layout of the various spaces. In Amer and in Jaipur, for instance, the Haveli tend to be elongated and organized along more than one courtyard. You know, sometimes 3. They are big palaces for big families. Okay, now the first problem was. The first exercise that I asked them to draw, it was an hotel. I said, design an hotel, because at the end an hotel is a modern palace, basically, no? So it's an interpretation of what a modern palace should be. Since Maharaja are not there anymore, so I doubt that Maharaja will ask us to design a palace. So, and they ended with a continuous structure, not a big box, but trying to replicate the sense of the continuous, you know, fabric that is made out of special buildings. This one very similar to Fatehpur Sikri Zenana, you see, here. But then a continuous sequence of courtyards that gives the sense of this continuity, and that the spaces of the rooms. But also another problem that you face is the one related to the Havelis. Okay, Havelis are dying, as you know. 2 or 3 are transformed into museums. Some of them are empty. But basically they are dying. You know why? Because the daughter-in-laws, they hate the mother-in-law. They don't want to live anymore together. Simple. It happens also in Italy, not only in India. And therefore, those structures, they are not working anymore because the big families are not there anymore. Now, we have two possibilities. We say, okay, bye-bye the Havelis. Or we say, look, is that possible to try to reinterpret the idea of the Haveli, try to reuse in a different way, that instead of a big family, we can have several families where they can preserve their own privacy, they can live together, and that the idea of the Haveli could stay there and remain. The first tentative was that was performed next to that area in a sloping part where all those Havelis were there and that are now destroyed. So the idea, this solution was a bit banal because it was the idea of having a structure that is made out of 3 courtyards, but having an access moved from the front, so that you don't have to cross all the time the courtyards of somebody else. You have the possibility of having an access from the side. Okay. Okay, and another level you have you will have an access to the mid-level, so that every courtyard at that point could accommodate 2 or 3 apartments. Every apartment has its own courtyard, so that the privacy is preserved, but you still live in a continuous fabric and not in detached small houses that are the ruin of the idea of city itself. Here you have a section and an elevation of the front of that, that there was a basement. It's not very important, but this is the basic idea, So it's all the courtyards are still there, but separated, and there's a certain privacy and autonomy. Or another tentative that was performed always in Amer, in an area that is along this small river. It's polluted river, actually. It's called in front of a bauli called a kund called Panamia. So this area is a sloping area in front of that. It's almost empty. So there was what we performed a different tentative still working with the idea of this sequence of courtyards, but transforming the courtyards into one elongated courtyard, that climbs the hill, and that this space, this type that was tripartite, divided in 3 parts. The central part becomes a single courtyard that goes up, and the apartments, are organizing along this courtyard, and they are all independent. They have their own courtyard, so there's no disruption of the privacy of every apartment. It's not perfect. We can dispute, but could work. Thank you very much indeed.
You can ask them now.
I was wondering, how do you see the theory of type and how would you study contemporary architecture with it?
What you say, stereotype?
No, the theory of type. How would you study contemporary architecture with it?
Okay. We have to make a distinction. Okay, contemporary architecture is made of so many contributions. Let's say modern architecture, okay? You have a line of research. The line of research goes back to all those architects that in the 20s and 30s, they, for instance, studied the residence, the low-cost housing. It was a very serious, long research, very appreciated. And it has consequences nowadays because the apartments that we design, they take care of those studies, and that is a component of the typological studies that's very useful, still useful today. So when I think in terms of designing a dwelling nowadays, on the way I look at that tradition from the modern movement, that is something, it's a patrimony that we cannot eliminate. It's very important. And at the same time, I suggest that we should also look at the process of history, because there we have also other important components that could be extremely useful. This is one side. The other side is the star system that is created by the modern movement. And that is the problem, because the star system, being extremely individualist, being based on the idea that everything comes from the invention of the star. I open a parenthesis. Invention comes from the Latin invenire, that means find, to find, not invent. Invent is something that came later. But the origin of the word, the sense of the word is find, something that already exists. So, end of the parenthesis. So in that sense, the idea of typological research and the idea of star system, they are not compatible. Okay? So if you think that our cities should be made by star architects, one against the other, that will create fabric that is made out of objects that are conflictual, if you believe that that is the word, okay, but there's no, we talk of other stuff, other things, we change argument. If on the contrary you think that the city should be made by buildings that try to get together, to have a certain harmony together, and in that sense I think that the typological studies could be extremely useful for that.
You said that type is never a formal schema. You said that type is never a formal schema. Can you explain in what perspective do you say that?
I'll try to make an example. One of the most famous Italian architects, Aldo Rossi, he belonged for a certain period of his life. Then at a certain point he gave up. But he wrote in his book what's this? About the city. Now I don't remember the title. Bravo, grazie. Yeah, thank you. In Architecture of the City, where he tries to give a theory, an idea of the type, of the typological studies, he conveys basically the idea that types are forms that are buried in the history or in your memory, that you can retrieve, you can play with them, at your will. But then he realized that this approach doesn't work, because he started to play poetically with those images. And then I realized that there's no connection with the typological research. Those are images. You can play with them. Fine. You want to be a poet? Fine. And in fact, in the author biography, it doesn't talk anymore of type or typological studies. So, in that sense, those images are scattered images. And I don't think it is correct. If you really believe that principles are in the history, you have to take all the history, all the process. And in that sense, the difference between us and Aldo Rossi is that we don't believe in single images, but we believe in all the process. And in a certain way, I would like to force the idea that, to me, the contemporary architecture, I'm a contemporary architecture because I design nowadays. Contemporary architecture is the last phase of that process, boring process that I have shown to you. It is the last one, because it should contain principles of the previous phase, or the previous, or the previous, or the previous, In that sense, we talk of process and not of single images. And it's a total different approach.
Yeah, I was quite fascinated with the cases of those palaces which grew, and I was wondering, most of these seem to have the intent of an individual who had an ability to take land and grow. But when you take it in the contemporary context and situation where, say, the cities are parcels, I mean, there's a separate land parcel, and when agreements between people who want to grow may become more complex than situations like that. I think some of it got reflected in some student project of the growing Haveli. But how do you imagine our urban situations if we were to, say, take from that idea of a growth on a certain principle?
Well, I can say two things. Okay. Let me take a bit from afar so we have time, if you allow me. If you go to Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, they have, in the 50s, they have designed a city that is based on grid. It's based on grids. It's based on plots that are, if I'm not wrong, are 20 meters by 20 meters. Okay? And basically this layout is taken from the London Act 1880. Okay? Exactly the same. Beef like that. Then, as a consequence, they had to introduce the idea of the setback, because if you work with those plots, then they introduce the idea of setbacks, and then that is another London Act 1884 or something like that. So they work with this, and of course what they got now, instead of courtyard houses, they have got stupid cottages that are 2 meters apart or 5 meters apart from the next. And then, of course, everyone is looking into the bedroom of the neighbor. So they create incredible fences, that are 5 meters tall with aluminum, corrugated metal, whatever, that are ridiculous, but that are the testimony of that difficulty of and can be adapted. Regarding the question, more general questions, Avelis, not Avelis, and so on. The reply is the following. When we talk of traditional types that worked so well up to yesterday, or we talk also of traditional technologies, I think that we were too much in a hurry in eliminating all that stuff. So we jumped into the diversity with enthusiasm, 50, 70 years ago, whenever, and really we neglected in one day all that. My question is that probably those structures or technologies, they have something good that could be recuperated. Definitely, if people invented them and they went on 1,000 years with it, there was something good in it. So why not to study them carefully? Why not to see what is positive? And at the end, if absolutely nothing is positive there, okay, we eliminate them. But I believe that before we change completely our attitude, probably we should explore more the possibilities of what we got from our history and traditions.
Alumni Association has asked me to do the job of thanking Professor Petruccioli, but I want to make 2 points here. And oftentimes, most of the students and many writers make no distinction between type and typology. Today, there was a demonstration that type is something that can be defined by itself, whereas typology is a science of types. This is a very good example of that aspect. And second aspect I wanted to talk about was drawing as such. Swinton Jacobs' drawings during the colonial period, then Batley's drawings nearly at the end of colonial period, Klaus Herdeg's portfolio, which Professor Petruccioli is very much aware of, and drawings that are made by him or his students. These are 4 or 5 types of drawings. And one sees right away that in his way of drawing, there is an analytical way of putting forward what you want to say. Drawing is not separately drawn from the analysis, which is a very important issue. And somehow there was a kind of a brotherhood that was developing for some of us who were looking at his work, and were developing a certain corner in our work in terms of vernacular architecture, which all has kind of come together in this lecture. And I'm very, very happy to see it. However, a few days back, he had sent a book to me, which was a study of a village in northeastern Sahara, a village called Siva, isn't it? Siva. It's a mud village. So the way I see Professor here is that right from the Indian sojourns of his in past and him looking at Islamic architecture, to afterwards going into the Aga Khan Foundation, to then going into Bari, there is a continuum that is built up by him in 2 ways. One, looking at Islamic architecture, Indo-Islamic architecture in India, and taking the work to students, with the students, converting them into projects, and simultaneously studying the tract of vernacular architecture. And this has been a wonderful journey, and today we saw some of it. Maybe next time over Siva and the other villages. On behalf of FAAA, thank you very much, sir. Very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you.